All right, so you're ready to take a deep dive into ego, and I gotta say, I'm pretty excited about this one.
Me too. This is a good one.
So we're using Ego as the Enemy by Ryan Holiday to kind of explore how to keep our ego in check, even when things are going really well.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this book is it doesn't just tell you to like get rid of your ego, which we all know is kind of, easier said than done, right? It kind of shows how ego can actually sabotage success even when it looks like we're winning.
Okay, now that's pretty interesting. So how does Holiday kind of illustrate that point?
Well, he uses the example of Tom Brady and the New England Patriots.
Oh, yeah.
Sixth-round draft pick, multiple Super Bowl MVPs, all that.
Yeah.
A phenomenal success story, right?
It's hard to argue with that level of achievement, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the Patriots must have been just ecstatic.
Well, here's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
Despite the Super Bowl rings, the Patriots considered the draft pick more lucky than smart.
Hold on, no, wait a minute. I'm trying to wrap my head around this.
Yeah.
They were disappointing, even though they won multiple Super Bowls with this guy. Why?
Because they were focused on their own internal scorecard.
Hmm.
They judged themselves against their own scouting process, which, in their view, almost let Brady slip away.
So even though they won in the eyes of the world, they saw room for improvement.
Yes.
In their own process.
In their own process, exactly.
And it's a pretty powerful way to look at things, I gotta say.
Yeah.
So how does this internal scorecard idea apply outside of sports, though?
Well, it's a principle you can use in any area of your life.
Okay.
Think about it. Are you measuring your success based on external validation or on your own personal growth and progress?
This makes me think about the difference between chasing likes on social media versus setting goals and working towards them, even when no one is watching.
Exactly, yeah. It's about defining your own standards of excellence, your own metrics for success. It's about staying focused on the process, on continually pushing yourself to be better, regardless of external recognition.
So it sounds like this internal scorecard helps us to stay grounded and focus on what truly matters.
Yeah.
Are there any other examples of people who kind of embodied this approach?
Absolutely, yeah. Take John Wooden, the legendary basketball coach.
Oh, yeah.
He's known for his incredible winning record, but he always emphasized that winning wasn't the true measure of success.
I'm guessing he had a different definition of success then.
He did.
What did he prioritize?
He believed that true success lay in knowing you did your best to become the best version of yourself. It wasn't about comparing yourself to others, but about maximizing your own potential.
So it's more about self-improvement and striving for excellence rather than just like racking up wins or accolades.
Precisely.
Okay.
And think about Bo Jackson.
Oh, yeah.
Incredible athlete.
Yeah.
Excelled in both baseball and football.
Mm-hmm.
Would you believe he didn't celebrate his achievements?
Really? Why not? I mean, someone that talented would be, reveling in their success.
Yeah, he felt he hadn't achieved perfection.
Wow.
He was constantly pushing himself.
Yeah.
Always striving for more.
Wow.
It's about the journey, the constant pursuit of growth rather than the destination.
That's a really interesting perspective,
Yeah.
It seems like both Wooden and Jackson understood that external validation can be fleeting. It's about something deeper, something more intrinsic.
Yeah.
But what about those times when ego kind of gets the better of us?
Yeah.
Those moments where we let pride or vanity cloud our judgment. How does that factor into this whole internal scorecard idea?
I think that's where we need to look at the downside of ego and the benefits of humility.
Okay.
Ego can make us complacent, blind to our weaknesses.
Yeah.
It can create a filter where we only see the good and ignore areas for improvement. Remember the quote from the book, "Vain men never hear anything but praise."
Oof. That is close to home.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in our own hype, you know what I mean?
Right.
So how does humility help then?
Well, humility allows us to see ourselves more clearly,
Right.
be open to learning and growing.
Yeah.
It's not about putting yourself down,
Right.
but about having an accurate self-assessment and a desire to improve. And that's how we become more resilient and better equipped to handle setbacks.
So are you saying that maintaining an internal scorecard and cultivating humility can actually make us more successful in the long run?
Well, I think it's not about guaranteeing success in the traditional sense.
Sure.
It's about reaching your full potential and becoming the best possible version of yourself. And that's a journey that requires constant self-reflection and a willingness to challenge your own ego.
This is really making me think about how I define success in my own life.
Right.
But practically speaking, how can we put this into action?
Yeah.
Are there any specific techniques that we can use?
Well, one helpful concept Holiday introduces is Adam Smith's indifferent spectator. So imagine an unbiased observer, completely removed from your situation, who's watching your actions and judging them objectively.
Okay, that's an interesting visual. It's like
Yeah.
having an imaginary mentor who's always giving you an honest assessment. I like that.
Right.
So how does this spectator help us in everyday life, though?
Well, think about a time you had to make a tough decision.
Yeah.
Maybe you were tempted to cut corners or do something that wasn't quite ethical.
Oh, I think we've all been there at some point.
Right.
Yeah.
But by imagining this indifferent spectator, we're forced to confront our actions from a more objective perspective.
Hmm.
It helps us stay accountable to our own values and standards.
Okay.
Would this impartial observer approve of our choices?
Wow, that's a powerful question.
Yeah.
It's easy to justify our actions when we're the only ones judging them,
Right.
but bringing in this indifferent spectator adds a whole new layer of accountability.
Exactly. And it helps us break free from those justifications we often use, like, no one will know, or it's not technically illegal.
I can see how this ties into the whole idea of long-term thinking versus short-term gratification.
Yeah.
It's about making choices that align with our values, even when they're difficult or inconvenient.
Absolutely. And an internal scorecard encourages us to play the long game, to build something sustainable that reflects who we are and what we stand for.
Mhm.
It's about smashing ego with continually higher standards, not out of greed or never being satisfied, but out of a desire for genuine improvement.
So to recap, we've got this internal scorecard, this indifferent spectator, and this concept of smashing ego with higher standards.
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in, but it's clear that this is about a fundamental shift in how we view success and approach personal growth.
I agree.
But isn't there a risk of becoming overly critical of ourselves with this approach?
Yeah.
How do we find that balance between striving for excellence and acknowledging our accomplishments?
That's a great question, and one we'll explore further as we continue our deep dive.
This is already giving me a lot to think about,
Yeah.
I've struggled with that balance myself, especially when it comes to I've struggled with that balance myself, especially when it comes to comparing myself to others.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in what everyone else is doing, then I lose sight of my own progress.
That's a common struggle, and it speaks to the power of social comparison.
Right.
But remember, the internal scorecard is about focusing on your own journey,
Yeah.
not someone else's.
Easier said than done, though, right?
Mhm.
But I can see how this indifferent spectator could be a helpful tool for kind of staying grounded.
Yeah.
It's like having that voice of reason saying, hey, you're doing okay, just focus on your own progress.
Exactly. It's about tuning out the noise and focusing on what truly matters to you.
This has been incredibly insightful, but I'm still kind of wondering about the practical application of all of this. Like, how do we train our ego, so to speak?
Right.
What are some tangible steps that we can take?
Well, I think one of the most important things is cultivating self-awareness. We need to recognize when ego is driving our decisions and actions. Are we doing something because it aligns with our values?
Yeah.
Or just to impress others?
That's a tough question to ask ourselves, honestly.
Yeah.
But it seems crucial for keeping ego in check.
It is. And it requires a willingness to be vulnerable, to admit we're not perfect,
Yeah.
that we make mistakes.
Uh-huh.
But that's where real growth happens.
Right.
If we're constantly trying to protect our ego, we'll miss out on those valuable learning opportunities.
So self-awareness is key.
Right.
What else can we do?
Another powerful tool is to focus on our effort,
Okay.
not just the outcome. We
Mhm.
may not always achieve the results that we want,
Yeah.
but we can always control our effort, our dedication, our
Mm.
commitment to excellence.
This reminds me of something I read recently about the importance of having a growth mindset.
Yes.
It's about embracing challenges and seeing setbacks as opportunities for learning.
Right.
It's not about being perfect, but about constantly striving to improve.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of an internal scorecard.
Yeah.
It's not about comparing ourselves to others or getting caught up in external validation.
Uh-huh.
It's about focusing on our own personal growth and development,
Correct.
which is something we all have control over.
And that's something we can all do, regardless of our circumstances.
Yeah.
We may not all be Super Bowl MVPs, but we can all strive to be the best version of ourselves.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this concept so empowering. It gives us agency, puts us in the driver's seat of our own lives.
Yeah.
We're not at the mercy of external factors or other people's opinions.
Right.
We have the power to define our own success and create a life that's truly meaningful and fulfilling.
This whole conversation has really made me think about how I'm approaching my own goals
Yeah.
and how I'm defining success.
Mm-hmm.
It's a real shift in perspective.
It is. And remember, it's an ongoing journey,
Yeah.
not a destination.
Right.
It's about constantly learning, growing, and evolving.
Right. So where do we go from here? What are some practical steps we can take to kind of apply these ideas?
Yeah.
Where do we even begin?
Well, start by paying attention to your self-talk.
Okay.
Are you constantly putting yourself down?
Uh-huh.
Or are you encouraging yourself and celebrating your progress?
That's a great point. Our thoughts have a powerful impact on our actions.
Right.
If we're always criticizing ourselves, it's hard to stay motivated and focused on improvement.
Exactly. And another thing you can do is surround yourself with people who support your growth.
Okay.
People who challenge you to be better, but also celebrate your successes.
So it's about having a team, a community
Yeah,
that helps us stay accountable to our values and our goals.
precisely. And remember, it's okay to ask for help.
Yeah.
We don't have to do this alone.
Right.
There are mentors, coaches, therapists,
Uh-huh.
and friends who can support us on this journey.
And of course, there are books like Ego is the Enemy that provide valuable insights and strategies for managing ego.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to experiment.
Yeah.
Try different things, see what works for you,
Okay.
and be willing to adjust your approach as you learn and grow. It's all part of the process.
It's about embracing the journey, isn't it? The ups and downs, the challenges and the triumphs.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that personal growth is a lifelong pursuit.
Precisely. And remember, it's not about being perfect.
Right.
It's about progress.
Yeah.
It's about striving to be a little bit better each day.
That idea of progress over perfection is so important.
It is.
It takes the pressure off
Yeah.
and allows us to enjoy the journey.
Right.
But let's face it, setbacks are inevitable.
Yeah.
How does this internal scorecard approach help us deal with failure?
Mm-hmm.
How can we turn those setbacks into opportunities for growth?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll explore further as we wrap up our deep dive into taming the ego.
Okay, so we've talked about the internal scorecard and that indifferent spectator, and even touched on the idea of, smashing ego with higher standards. But how does all of this help us actually deal with setbacks? Like, how can we actually use these ideas when we, face failure?
Well, that's where I think the real power of this approach comes in. When we're not so focused on external validation, failure becomes less about our worth as a person and more about like a specific area where we can improve.
Well, it's less, I failed, and more like, okay, this didn't work out as planned, but what can I learn from
Oh,
it?
exactly. Yeah. That shifting perspective is incredibly powerful. It lets us bounce back from setbacks faster and approach challenges with a more positive mindset.
Yeah, I'm starting to see how this all kind of connects.
Yeah.
We touched on this earlier, but how does focusing on effort rather than just the outcomes play into handling failure?
Well, when you focus on effort, you always have something that you can control, even when the results don't go your way. You can always put in the work, dedicate yourself to the process, and learn from every experience.
That makes a lot of sense. It kind of takes the pressure off needing to be perfect all the time.
Exactly. It's about progress, not perfection.
Right. Yeah.
You're constantly learning, iterating, and getting better, and that's something to be proud of, even when things don't go exactly as planned.
Yeah, this whole conversation has really highlighted the importance of self-reflection for me.
Yeah.
It's not just about setting goals and working hard, but it's also about taking the time to kind of step back and assess our progress and make adjustments along the way.
Absolutely, and that's where the indifferent spectator can be so helpful.
Well, we do.
Remember, it allows us to look at our actions with a more objective eye.
Yeah.
It helps us identify blind spots and areas for improvement without judgment.
It's like having that wise friend who can give you honest feedback without sugarcoating it.
Yes, and that feedback, even if it's tough to hear, is essential for growth.
Yeah.
It helps us stay on track and make sure we're living in alignment with our values and goals.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Ryan Holiday's Ego is the Enemy, what's the one key takeaway you want listeners to remember?
I would say this. If you were your own indifferent spectator, what areas for improvement would you see in your own life? What steps could you take to raise your internal standards and strive for excellence in all that you do?
That's a powerful question for all of us to consider.
Yeah,
And remember, this is a journey, not a destination.
right.
Keep exploring these ideas, keep challenging yourself, and keep striving to become the best version of yourself.
I agree.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.